I've known white liberals who have told me that they're frightened by the experiences that their children have had, that their children coming out of the experience have not had a positive experience.
What do you mean? Like fights between blacks?
Right, that tend then to generate more hostility between races. And then, you know, I just give one example. I ride a bicycle and frequently pass by school in the neighborhood that's relatively on balance, I would say, and observe the cluster of children. And it's rare when you see black and white children playing together.
Well, for me, I've come to understand that the problems associated with black folks in the school system and society overall.
And these are people that they're discussing whether desegregation was a benefit
back in 1971 when I was
to black
involved
people
in
or
the
not.
demonstrations at Northside.
So they're giving their life experience.
To think that a black principal or or having the white faculty of a school implement rules and regulations in a more fairly and equitable way would solve our problems, to me was naive thinking. What we did back in 1971, I think, was probably a necessary step in the right direction. But to say that it solved whatever problems there is to be solved, I think would be a gross misstatement.
Because there are some cases where you can have one kid living on one side of the street and another kid living on the other side of the street, and they attend school 15 miles away. It just hasn't worked. I think what everybody's saying here is that when we had black schools, black children were being educated. You know, everybody in this room is a product of a black education, a black school. Our kids today are not receiving that same kind of quality education. You know, we have the books now, but they're giving us books for slow learners, you know, or they're tracking us in non-college prep tracks. You know, we're getting the education in the facilities, but, you know, what are we being educated for? And while there are some exceptions to the rule, I think the vast majority, from what I've seen and from talking to, and from listening tonight, I learned a lot from listening tonight. It just hasn't worked.
It was really insanity on our part to think that we could send our children to be taught by races, and by sending them that they were going to change. For the most part, our children today are being destroyed. They're being sent into a hostile environment that constantly, in very insidious ways, tell them they're no good. They can't learn. And then we wonder why there's so many problems.
I think that we have learned well, too, and that we have to learn that we have to become more astute
and this is about 50 years ago, so we can see the effects of it now.
And that those of us who are in education have to be sort of demanding that we be involved in the decision-making process, and that those of us who are serving in certain capacities or in certain positions must man those positions, and that we must have the support of the entire black community.
I think the road to liberation is a long way off, and we haven't gotten there yet. And there's a lot more work to be done to get there.
And parents, you know, parents got to understand that part too. You know, education is responsible to teach, but not to raise. You can educate a student, but you can't raise a student.
In other words, what we once had or what we once were will perhaps never be again, but there's today or there's another tomorrow as far as from where we can pick ourselves up from now. I think we will always be in a desegregated or an integrated society, but we will have to take and make the best of whatever resources that we have in this particular society. Is that we can be represented in the society in which we are presently competing in. Our students can be represented if we have equal representation or equal consideration of our students and all our teachers and all of our administrators.
That's a girl that was
And
forced to
sometimes you
go
wish
to
that maybe Paul Bro, which is right down the street from you, that it
integrated
was still
schools.
open.
Yes, very much so. Because she went there and she really enjoyed it. It's a nice school. Yes.
Do you wish you could go to
Oh,
high
yeah,
school in your
sure.
neighborhood?
Because that way I wouldn't have to get up so early and then run to the bus stop and stuff. You know, I could just walk to school and stuff. It'll be nice, and I could be with all my friends. So yeah, I wish Paul Bro would have turn into a high school.
Yeah, because this way all of her friends, the ones in the neighborhood would all be together.
That's great.
There can be no gainsaying of the fact that that is a crisis in race relations today. This crisis has been precipitated to a great extent by the resistance of many reactionary elements in the South to the Supreme Court's momentous decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in the public schools. This resistance has risen to ominous proportions. There are still legislative halls in the South ringing loud with such words as interposition and nullification, and all of these forces have conjoined to make for massive resistance. In spite of this massive and determined resistance, the objective observer must admit that the old South has passed away, never to return again. Many of the problems in the South today exist because there are still those individuals who are seeking to perpetuate a system of human values that came into being under a slave plantation system and which cannot survive in a day of democratic equalitarianism. Many forces are at work breaking down the old system. For instance, there is a great deal of industrialization going on in the South with a concomitant urbanization. As this industrialization takes place, it will inevitably break down the mores of white supremacy. Also hopeful is the fact that many persons in the white South are coming to see that bigotry is costly and bad for business. That is also the rolling tide of world opinion. Within the last few years, many new independent nations have come into being in both Asia and Africa. And as these new independent nations come into being, the leaders and the people are saying that racism and colonialism must go, and that they are making it clear that they will not respect any nation that will subject a segment of its citizens on the basis of race. And with this rolling tide of world opinion, the federal government will inevitably take a stronger and more forthright stand in breaking down the barriers of racial segregation. And I think that very few Southerners enjoy having the South lumped in the same category with the Union of South Africa as a last refuge of segregated power. Also hopeful is the fact that many human relations agencies are coming into being. There are many persons in the white South who have a nagging conscience concerning this matter, and they are willing to work in many ways, sometimes in quiet and unpublicized ways, in order to implement the law of the land. But probably more than anything else, the determination of the Negro himself will break down the barriers of segregation and discrimination. For many years, the Negro passively accepted and adjusted to the conditions of segregation and discrimination. But today, in many ways, thousands and thousands of Negroes are making it clear that they do not like segregation, and they are willing to suffer and sacrifice in order to make integration a reality. This is the meaning of the student movement, This is the meaning of the numerous developments that are taking place all over the South. And I think with all of these forces working together, in the not too distant future, we will be able to see a desegregated society. And certainly most of the major centers and major cities of the South will be desegregated in the not too distant future. And I am sure that after the desegregation process, we will move on to a thoroughly integrated society in the not too distant future. This is the meaning of the numerous developments.
Wow. So we got, since the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they've been trying to desegregate, and we're in 2025, and we still under the same type of ideology. And really, they want a lot of black people to be concerned about it, but really, black people are kind of like out of this fight. This is not even a fight that we're in. We just got to work together and do what we can to take care of ourselves. So this was pretty interesting, but I was just overviewing this just to see what it was like back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And we come to the conclusion that a lot of this thing, we should have kept our schools, we should have kept our own communities and trying to work together. So that would have worked out way more than this right here.